Thank you, Congress. Well, we live in interesting times. I had hoped to give a different kind of speech, one which could have welcomed a change in government to one which cared for working people. I can't do that, but I can congratulate Jeremy Corbyn on an extraordinary and momentous victory, and hope, as we all do, that it will usher in not just a new era of politics, but ultimately a Labour government based on solid Labour values and solid Labour principles. But Congress, we're a long way from that, and we've got a lot of work to do to get there. It's traditional on these occasions to be upbeat, to talk about successes over the year. It's also traditional to highlight the flaws of the government, and that's a long and ignoble list. But just to do that would be to ignore the pressing realities of our situation. So I'm not going to go for the easy option, but the much less comfortable one of reflecting on where we are as a union movement and asking some hard questions about how we move forward and how we build on the current tide of optimism. Because trade unions are at a critical point. How we manage our affairs over the next few years is vital to our future. And it's no time, Congress, to sit on our laurels. Of course, we need to remember and celebrate our achievements. And of course, we need to remember that trade unions were born in struggle and have always faced attacks from the state and powerful vested interests, and that we are resilient. But our aim is not to survive, but to thrive and make a difference. So just now, I think there's a greater need for honest debate and taking stock, and facing up to some difficult facts. Because the world of work has changed dramatically. The nature of jobs, workplaces, and employment patterns are very different from just a few years ago. And the evidence is that we are not keeping pace with these changes, and that collective bargaining, which was once the norm, in 1979, 80% of wages were set by collective bargaining, has now become the exception. In parallel, we've suffered a long-term membership decline. In 1979, the TUC had over 13 million members, some 55% of all workers. Today, we have 5.8 million, around 20% of all workers, whose average age is way above the average for the workforce. This Congress is very worrying arithmetic. We're also increasingly a public sector movement, where we have high density among certain groups of workers, but in far too many private sector workplaces, we are simply not visible. We've all analysed the causes of this decline, and I doubt there's much disagreement that they lie in the decline of manufacturing, privatisation, the growth of a fragmented private services sector, employer hostility, and of course the success of right-wing ideologues in portraying trade unions as inimical to the national interest. I sometimes fear we spend too much time on this analysis. The point, as someone famous once said, is not to interpret the world, but to change it. I've always had a simple approach. Unless we grow in numbers, we cannot grow in strength and influence. Unless we grow in numbers, we will not be able to reverse the decline in collective bargaining. And unless we grow in numbers, we cannot renew and refresh our activist base. If the world of work has changed, so has the political landscape. The general election, as we know, made a difficult situation worse, as progressive politics did not carry the day across the UK. Plenty of ordinary workers and union members voted Tory. To pretend otherwise is to ignore the facts. They didn't abstain, that might have been explicable, but willingly put a cross in the box. The challenge for us is to understand why they voted for a party which takes every opportunity to attack trade unions and which proudly commits itself to the damaging politics and economics of austerity, and what lessons that has for us. To understand why the truths that seem so self-evident here failed to convince enough of the electorate. Because being right is not enough. We also have to be persuasive, and it seems we weren't persuasive enough. And the answer isn't just to shout louder. Let's be clear, we have some very difficult years ahead. The Tories want to privatise and shrink the state, to constrain and marginalise trade unions, to attack our legitimacy and our very ability to function, to create a world of work where all the power lies with employers and where workers are compliant and available while their share of national wealth continues to decline. It's clear we have a major battle ahead. So a vital question is, how battle ready are we? By that I mean, where are we organised? How strong is our membership base? How good our reps structure? How willing are members to support us? How good is our information on these vital questions? If we're honest, Congress, in too many cases, the answers should give us all reason to pause. Because it's not enough to have strong arguments, we must also have strong organisation. I believe we're facing a watershed, and so we cannot adopt a business as usual approach. But let's be honest, we can find it hard to change. We cling on to arcane processes and procedures and structures, our own little nooks and crannies, and I'm not sure we always test them against the need to build membership. And sometimes we can believe our own propaganda, understating the reach and strength of our opponents and overstating our own. In the search for answers for some very difficult questions, we should not resort simply to blaming each other. It isn't enough either to blame the media, the government, and employers, although there's lots of truth in that, of course. We have a hostile media, a very hostile government, and some pretty hostile employers. There's certainly a large and powerful grouping wanting a union-free world. But we won't change anything by shouting or even analysing from the sidelines. We can only change things from within, by what we do to change the balance of power in society. And for us, that starts with what happens in the workplace. We'll be taking some vital decisions over the next few days, but the truth is, without the trade union organisation on the ground capable of delivering them and bringing our policies to life, they will count for less and help fewer workers. I've dealt with many employers over the years. They're usually prepared to listen to me, but I know, Congress, they listen to me a lot more carefully when most of their workers are union members. So we have to rebuild trade unionism to recover the ground we have lost. We have to organise. And that means we have to go out and talk to non-members, which takes time and effort and resource. But it's the only way to guarantee that there are positive conversations about trade unions where it matters most, at work. And let's not pretend this is easy. I'm sure everyone in the hall knows that. But it is too easy to spend time with others who agree with us. Too easy to retreat to the comfort zone of our activist base, rather than face up to the fact that millions of workers have still to be persuaded to join the club. Some of my most difficult conversations over the past 35 years have been with non-members while I've been walking around workplaces. Not always comfortable, and much less enjoyable, and much harder, say, than addressing the Tolpuddle rally. But those experiences have kept me grounded and convinced me that we have to put in the graft, because there's no easy route to growth, no silver bullet to hand. Jeremy has plenty on his plate just now, as I'm sure you know. Of course, we must give workers good reasons to join and provide confident and credible leadership and give hope of a better future by campaigning for change. But we still have to put the work in on the ground to make real connections with workers who are not union members. Even where we've made major policy gains, the minimum wage and rights for agency workers, for example, these have not magically led to growing membership in the sectors most affected. We've had to work for that. So it seems to me the only guaranteed option is to step up that work. And if that means that we have to rebalance priorities, resources, and tasks, so be it. If we have to spend less time in meetings, very often with each other, so be it. Because there's nothing more important just now than increasing membership and extending collective bargaining. The good news is that we have plenty of opportunities. Trade union values are popular, indeed more popular probably than trade unions. Why is this? Why do notions of fairness, equality, and justice at work appear to have more appeal than the organisations that stand for them? Why is it, if we have such a popular message, that we are failing to convince enough people to join? I think the answer is this, and it's simple. We are not getting out there as much as we should to make the case to new generations of workers in a way which chimes with their concerns. Now, we have to close the gap between our values and our reach to support workplace justice to convert support for workplace justice into trade union membership. And we need to test what we do by whether it helps close that gap. We cannot afford to spend too much time in a closed loop preaching to the converted when we need to reach out to the unconverted. And we have a very good story to tell. But unless we go out and tell it, too few will know. And when we put our mind to it, we succeed. If we look under the surface and behind the headlines, we can see the seeds of our regeneration. One of the real privileges of being president is that I see all the nominations for organising awards, and there are some really inspiring stories. Examples of successful organising by ordinary workers in all kinds of sectors and workplaces. Cases where often one individual has, through sheer will and effort, organised a workplace, run a campaign, engaged a community, and won for workers. Where workers have put their heads above the parapet and fought against dictatorial employers. Where against the odds, individuals have built collective organisation that has improved the lives of all their colleagues. These are the largely unsung heroes and heroines of our movement, and I think there are plenty more out there keen to fight for justice in the workplace. So we need to spend more time finding, supporting, and working with them, and celebrating and thanking them. Because membership decline is not inevitable. Indeed, a few unions have increased their private sector membership, and I pay tribute to them and the efforts they are making. And perhaps we need a new settlement amongst ourselves with fair give and take, rather than a fantasy turf war where we end up arguing about which union owns which group of non-members. The prize of growth and renewal is within our reach, Congress, and we owe it to those who fought for and built trade unions and to future generations to make sure we grasp it. I hope you understand why I've departed from tradition and focused on the deep-seated challenges facing us rather than our achievements. Because in order to speak truth to power, we first have to speak truth to ourselves. I'm very proud to be president of a movement with a proud history, which protects the weak against the strong, which speaks up for justice and dignity, but which is also about building successful workplaces, successful employers, and a successful economy. We make the world a better place. Look no further than the work of those unions who brought to light the scandal of restaurant chains keeping some or all of their workers' tips. That was trade unionism at its best, speaking up collectively for workers against the power of employers. It's been an immense privilege to work so closely with the TUC and many colleagues from across the movement over the past year. It gives me enormous confidence and hope about the future. I know, as you do, that we face many challenges and problems. I know our opponents want to silence dissent, marginalise progressive values, contain and criminalise protest, and create a docile workforce. But I also know that if we are united and determined, we will not let them. Thank you for listening, and have a good conference.